From ultimately minor leaps in logic which have chipped away at fans ever since, to absolutely gigantic plot holes, ludicrous subplots, and everything in between. This is Whatculture, and here are film and TV moments that made no sense. Carmy gets locked in the fridge, the bear. The Bear's generally phenomenal second season concludes with an episode where Carmy gets locked inside his restaurant's walk-in fridge when the handle breaks off. It's a payoff to the fact that Carmy has been meaning to get the handle fixed for a good while, yet being preoccupied with the restaurant's opening, he simply forgot to do it. These things happen after all, except as many viewers pointed out following the episode's airing, every walk-in fridge installed at a restaurant will have a safety latch on the inside, allowing anyone potentially trapped inside to easily free themselves in the event of catastrophe. Yet for dramatic reasons, this is curiously ignored in the episode, which concludes with the staff bringing in power tools to effectively saw the door open. While the final moments of the episode show sparks flying inside the fridge as Carmy waits to be freed, this itself doesn't make much sense either. All a handyman would need to do is remove the screws on the door's hinges in order to get him out. Granted, The Bear is a brilliant enough show, and categorically not a documentary, that it's easy to ignore most instances of dramatic license, though this one did feel more contrived than most. And with The Bear in mind, I want to know what your favourite show of 2023 was. If it wasn't The Bear, then you let me know what is in the comment section down below.
Dinosaurs spread across the globe, Jurassic World Dominion. At the end of Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom, the rescued animals were released into the wild. This is what kicked off what should have been a story about trying to cohabit with dinosaurs in the real world, but instead it became about killer locusts instead. Though Dominion ultimately had very little to do with dinosaurs in the wild, it did begin to set the stage for such a story. Of the dinosaurs that were freed, some remained in the wild, while some found civilizations all over the world. There was even a visual showing the spread across the entire globe, but this doesn't exactly make sense. There are far more dinosaurs in the world by the time of Dominion than were originally released, which is easily explained as the original Jurassic Park showed that dinosaurs can breed, but how exactly did life find a way to transport these giants across the ocean? There was a certain amount of black market dealings, but these animals weren't moved across the world to be free. Even if they did escape their captivity, they wouldn't be number enough to create the global issue spoken about at the beginning of the movie. Ugh, honestly, how unrealistic, Jurassic World.
Jocelyn was in control the entire time, the idol. No TV show has proven quite so controversial as HBO's The Idol, which made troubling headlines months before its premiere due to extensive behind-the-scenes issues, resulting in a large bulk of the series being reshot. It finally released to generally scathing reviews over the summer, despite some scattered praise for Lily Rose Depp's performance as embattled pop star Jocelyn, yet ultimately saved its most WTF moment of all for the very last episode. Throughout the show, the audience is led to believe that Jocelyn has been ensnared and exploited by sleazeball nightclub owner Tedros. But the big twist reveals that this wasn't quite the truth. Rather, it's implied that Jocelyn has been lying about her late mother's abusive behavior in order to trap Tedros and win the sympathy of her legion of fans, effectively allowing her to become the cult leader which Tedros has been painted as over the course of the season. It's an amusing idea which could theoretically come off as empowering for Jocelyn, yet given the overall storytelling deficiencies on offer here, it can't help but feel convoluted and manipulative in the worst way. If Jocelyn lied about being abused, it ultimately raises a ton more questions about the internal logic of both the story and Jocelyn herself, rather than merely inviting audiences to rewatch the series within an intriguing new context. Winston's different accent, the Continental from the world of John Wick. The Continental was a pretty good prequel to the John Wick movies, as long as you could get over the actually significant hurdle of accepting Colin Woodell in the role of a young Winston Scott, played so deliciously by Ian McShane in the films. This isn't so much a knock against Woodell's physical performance as it is his accent, which settles simply for broadly American, making it a far cry from McShane's more distinctive transatlantic twang, broached firmly between English and American. People certainly change a lot over 50 years, and that absolutely includes accents, but given that Winston resides in New York in both the movies and the prequel series, it doesn't really track that he sounds so no different in the latter. Series director Albert Hughes did at least address the issue head-on in interviews, telling Gizmodo that they opted not to have Woodell simply imitate McShane's incredibly distinctive accent, but rather try to capture the essence of the man's character. All the same, it's immensely distracting when you start watching the show, and immediately places a barrier between the audience and their acceptance of this character as young Winston.
Zurg isn't Buzz's father, Lightyear. In 2022, Pixar released its first cinematic spin-off from the Toy Story franchise, and audiences were confused to say the least. Chris Evans took over from Tim Allen voicing the titular character in Lightyear, showing the in-universe film Andy watched when he was a kid that inspired the merchandise which included his beloved Buzz toy. The concept itself confused a lot of people, but there was one moment in particular that actively contradicted the Toy Story canon in a way that made absolutely no sense, and this revolved around Buzz's relationship with Zurg. Way back in Toy Story 2, it was confirmed that Zurg was Buzz's father. This is what the Buzz Lightyear toy based on the Lightyear movie believed, so naturally, it should have been the case that in Andy's favourite film, Zurg was in fact Buzz's dad. This wasn't the case, however, as the villain was actually revealed to be a different version of Buzz from the future. Now, subverting audience expectations and offering surprises is one thing, but this was something that had already been well established and you just walked all over it. What are you doing?
Nobody hates Ashley for the bridge stunt. Squid Game The Challenge. Squid Game The Challenge had been the game show on everyone's lips for better or worse throughout the last few weeks of 2023. But the single moment that perhaps baffled fans more than any, the Ashley stunt on Glass Bridge. The Glass Bridge game saw contestants attempting to cross, you guessed it, a glass bridge, while picking the correct glass tile to stand on, one tile being sturdy, the other sending them falling hilariously through the floor. The 20 remaining players had 30 minutes to cross the bridge, with the group collectively agreeing to step on a single tile each, giving them a seemingly equally fair shot of making it to the end. This was all well and good, until Ashley refused to play ball and leap to a tile, effectively holding the game up until Trey stepped up and took her place, ultimately leading to his elimination. Yet in the wake of Ashley's decision, the episode shows the remaining contestants having strangely little ill will towards her, as proved confusing for large groups of viewers dumbfounded by her selfish choice. Furthermore, the fact that Mai was then villainized for nominating Ashley in the subsequent Die test game comes across as further strange. Why wouldn't she nominate the person who wasn't being a team player? Fans have speculated that Netflix's manipulative editing may have been to blame here, because why else wouldn't the surviving contestants be absolutely fuming with Ashley? Roll Rhodey, Secret Invasion. We probably could have just stopped at Secret Invasion with this one, given how much of the show's storytelling and character work felt inconsistent with established facts in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But by far the most polarizing aspect of the series was the Skrull Rhodey debacle. In the season's 4th episode, it's revealed that Rhodey is actually a female Skrull in disguise named Rava, with the real Rhodey having been incarcerated by the Skrulls for an indeterminate period of time. Though the twist was certainly an interesting idea, the execution was way off. A big part of the problem? It was never clarified precisely when Rhodey was first replaced, and when director Ali Salim suggested that it occurred after Captain America Civil War, that only frustrated fans more. After all, the idea that the Rhodey we saw mourning Tony Stark in Avengers Endgame was a doppelganger robs that moment of its emotional power and just leaves a massively sour taste. That's without even getting into the many nitpicky reasons why the MCU actively contradicts the idea of Rhodey being a Skrull for many years. Stupid stuff. And just a quick one to say thank you for checking out this video today, you lovely lot. And if you're enjoying yourself, then tap on that subscribe button and enjoy more Whatculture goodness.
Multiversal travel rules, Spider-Man No Way Home. There are many films, particularly those that feature powers, magic, and the multiverse theory, that require you to suspend your disbelief while watching. But there are things that can pull you out of the moment. In particular, if a story lays down certain rules and then breaks those rules itself, you can't help but question what's going on. When Peter Parker and Doctor Strange messed up the spell, people who knew the identity of Spider-Man from across the multiverse were dragged to Earth 616. However, in The Amazing Spider-Man 2, Max Dillon never found out who was behind Spidey's mask, so why then was he brought to Earth 616? These nonsensical rules even traverse multiple franchises, as this same spell sent Michael Keaton's Adrian Toomes to Michael Morbius's universe. However, there was nothing in No Way Home home to suggest that anything happened to those already on Earth 616 who knew who Spidey was, and Peter certainly made no effort to help them if something did. I've said it before, I'll say it again. My brain hurts.
Nate and Jade's romance, Ted Lasso. Ted Lasso's third season made a number of head-scratching creative decisions which majorly divided fans. But perhaps the oddest of the lot? Shoehorning in a romance between Nate and Jade, the stern hostess at Nate's favourite restaurant, A Taste of Athens. Despite Jade showing no romantic interest whatsoever in Nate, and even appearing to have considerable dislike for him whenever he visits the eatery, midway through the season the pair rather suddenly develop a bond and become lovers. If the writers were going for an opposite-attract dynamic, it didn't really work because they never showed us why Jade would change her mind about Nate. And more to the point, Jade is so underdeveloped as a character that she ends up feeling more like a prop for Nate's own agency than a genuine person in her own right. As a result, the whole setup felt incredibly forced, with the writers apparently believing that Nate's redemption arc absolutely needed a romantic component in order to fully succeed. Aiden dumps Carrie because reasons? And just like that. Though the second season of And Just Like That marked a decent dramatic improvement in a number of ways, it all came hilariously crashing down in the season's final episode, just as Carrie seemed destined to get her happily ever after again with old flame Aiden. In the latter half of the season, Carrie and Aiden decide to move in together, with Carrie finally moving out of her beloved apartment into a lush house. But a major spanner is thrown in the works in the final episode, when Aiden's 14-year-old son Wyatt crashes his truck in a DUI accident. This causes Aiden to realize that his sons need him, and so he tells Carrie he can't move in with her, instead deciding to head back to Virginia to look after his kids. But that's not quite the end for the pair. They agree to a 5-year relationship pause, by which time Aiden's kids will be over the age of 18 and he claims he'll return to Carrie. Beyond being a pathetically transparent way to drag out the series drama, just when Carrie had a happy ending in sight, this was so ridiculous that some fans quite understandably believe that Aiden hatched the whole scheme as a means of punishing Carrie for her cheating on him during their initial relationship decades prior. And even if you don't buy into that theory, it's completely absurd. No 50-something person is wasting 5 years of their romantic life waiting on the hook for their beloved, and to even ask someone to do that is just maddening.
Going to space in a car, F9. Imagine thinking back in 2001 that the Fast and Furious franchise would go from illegal drag races to actually sending a car into space. Well, that's exactly what happened in F9. The movie included magnets sending cars flying through the streets and a character returning from beyond the grave, but neither of these came close to being its most nonsensical moment. Roman and Tej are tasked with disabling a satellite, something they achieve by strapping a couple of rocket engines onto a car and heading into space. Only the Fast franchise could have the sheer gall to approach something like this and actually make it happen. Forget the years of training it takes to prepare to go into space, the multi-billion-dollar spacecrafts and equipment, and the immeasurable amount of expertise. Apparently, all you need is 2 guys wearing scuba helmets and duct tape in a car with a couple of extra engines to breach the final frontier.
The noticeably aged cast, Sex Education. Sex Education is a wonderful comedy series, which had an less than wonderful conclusion. Though the primary issues were creative ones, many fans also couldn't help but point out the distractingly large chasm between the ages of the central characters and the actors playing them. This isn't a new issue for any TV show centered around school or college-age characters, yet given that Sex Education's 4 seasons were released over almost 5 years, and yet covered just 2 years of narrative time, it's little surprise that actors' ages began to lose credibility. The most egregious examples among the cast are 30-year-old Kuti Gatwa, 29-year-old Amy Lou Wood, 28-year-old Kadar Williams Sterling, 27-year-old Emma Mackey and Connor Swindles, and 25-year-old Mimi Keane. It simply wasn't easy to accept that these performers were still playing teenagers in 2023. And while there's little practically that can really be done about it, horrid digital de-aging be damned, it is nevertheless something that ultimately became tough to ignore. Everything about Amanda, Hijack. Apple's Idris Elba starring thriller series Hijack was a pretty taut and entertaining ride for the most part, though took a wild left turn in its penultimate episode. The show takes place on a hijacked passenger plane during its flight from Dubai to London in more or less real time. And at the end of episode 6, one of the plane's largely unseen passengers Amanda suddenly pulls out a gun, executes the plane's pilot, and locks herself inside the cockpit. What? The final episode subsequently reveals that the hijacking was arranged to crash the stock of the plane's airline, Kingdom Air. Because with the villains short-selling against the stock, they stood to profit from the company's stock price plummeting. As for Amanda, she's blackmailed into flying the plane in order to prevent the bad guys from killing her daughter. And though she initially believes she needs to crash the plane into London in order to secure her daughter's safety, she's eventually persuaded against it by negotiator Sam. Moreover, Amanda rather conveniently secures an agreement with the authorities that she won't be arrested upon landing the plane. And indeed, she simply goes free at show's end. There's just so much silliness here. First, did Amanda really need to shoot the pilot dead rather than simply disable him? And secondly, would the cops really honor a flimsy immunity agreement? Nothing was signed. And considering she both murdered a man and almost killed hundreds of people by crashing a plane, would anyone really care if they swiftly reneged on it?
The Dagger, Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker. Star Wars has always loved a good MacGuffin, and in The Rise of Skywalker, the writers didn't stop at just one. It's one of those typical tales that you need to find this, but in order to find this, you have to find that first, and in order to find that, you've got to find something else, which culminates in The Dagger. It wasn't the smoothest of rides, and we had to translate it, then couldn't translate it, then thought it was lost, and then found it again, and then had to make a journey to find the ruins of the Death Star. Rey had to line up the markings of the Dagger's edge with that of the fallen planet killer, which would then point to exactly where the Wayfinder was hidden. However, she would have to be in the exact right position, standing at the exact right angle, otherwise being off by even the slightest of margins could have led to a very different destination. There was nothing on the Dagger to suggest where Rey should stand, and yet she looked and lined it up from where she just so happened to be standing and managed to find their path perfectly. Plain and simply, this shouldn't have been that easy. It's just lazy writing.
Freddy gets smart when he gets drunk, Frasier. Now, to be completely fair to the Frasier revival, it was actually a good deal better than most were expecting, especially considering the absence of Frasier's brother Niles. But the series did occasionally get a little too sitcom-y for its own good, as evidenced by its 8th episode, where it's revealed that whenever Frasier's firefighter son Freddy gets drunk, he ditches the working class facade he adopts in order to fit in with his co-workers, and gets incredibly erudite, pontificating on highfalutin subjects, much to his colleagues' amusement. It's certainly a fun idea, albeit one that's shown a little too cartoonishly in the episode, as if to suggest that poor Freddy has quite literally sublimated his real personality when sober, and is basically playing a character for most of his right-minded life. It's more depressing than funny, honestly, and stretches the credibility of his character close to snapping point, especially as this revelation is rather soundly ignored in the series' 2 remaining episodes. How strange.
Time travel rules, Avengers Endgame. Time travel storylines are always tricky because unless they are 100% watertight, there will be at least some kind of plot hole, inconsistency, or rule break found. Unfortunately, very rarely are these stories 100% watertight, and Avengers Endgame is no exception. During the time heist, Hulk tried to explain time travel rules as they exist in the MCU, and in all honesty, he did a pretty poor job of it. Audiences and characters alike ended up more confused than they were before, and this wasn't helped by one of the final scenes in the entire film. Essentially, going back to the past doesn't change anything in that timeline. It instead branches out and creates a completely new timeline. So the time heist didn't change anything in their reality, but instead created a new and separate reality in which they could defeat Thanos. Well, that's what Hulk said anyway. With that in mind then, when Steve went back in time to return the Infinity Stones and live his life with Peggy, that should have been in a separate timeline. Old man Steve shouldn't have been able to sit and meet the people from his old life decades in the future because he should have been in a different timeline. Instead, what he did was go back to the past and change the future, which is something that Banner specifically said he couldn't do. I'm still confused.